Welcome. Jennifer doesn't seem to be here, does she?
She just arrived.
Excellent. Maybe we'll start when she walks in.
We're ready.
I don't remember. Stephen didn't remember exactly the words associated with the acronym CEDAR. And I myself don't exactly remember all of the words associated with the acronym sassafras. So, Jennifer,
I love all the attention.
what does sassafras stand for?
Oh, Soryu, I was afraid you would quiz me on the hardest one. I have 3 of the others memorized.
Yes, you can do it. Sacrifice. I started you there. Can you get the rest? Sacrifice.
Acolytes?
Attachment.
Autonomy.
Wasn't that acolytes?
No, acolytes was in another one.
Sacrifice.
Because no one has it. No one has a picture of that.
I have a memory, because I was in charge of it.
Yes.
And so I think it
Yes.
was sacrifice attachment,
Yes.
sacrifice self,
Yes.
and what next?
Sacrifice all sacrificing.
Sacrifice.
F?
Wait, the
What
F.
F? Yep, what's the F?
Focus,
Focus,
On sacrifice.
radically,
radically,
around or about,
about,
sacrificing.
yeah.
Oh, it was about. Yes, it was about. Sacrifice attachment, sacrifice self, focus radically about sacrifice. Good. Excellent. So some of you may not have been at the Thanksgiving celebration. We had a wonderful time. And one of the most enjoyable parts of it was the skit section. Very funny and very significant, very powerful. A lot of deep messages were given in an amusing, light form. And one of the highlights was the skit about the various acronyms made out of tree names indicating the programs at Maple, which is a program of cedar. So one of the tree names was sassafras, and sassafras, as you may have noticed, has a lot of S's in it, and those S's are primarily dedicated to sacrifice, as we all should be. So I talk about sacrifice a lot, and sacrifice is one way of talking about generosity, one way of talking about giving. This season is one that's often associated with giving, and giving is the foundation of many spiritual paths. In terms of Buddhism, certainly, giving, generosity, dana, is considered to be absolutely foundational and a particularly powerful method of sacrificing attachment. I'd like to go over a little bit about the various traditions of the world that encourage us to give, and connect that with the path that we're on. Many of you know about Peace Pilgrim. Peace Pilgrim was a magnificent spiritual leader in the United States in this past century. And she talked a great deal about giving, sharing, generosity. She she failed to find, but spent a long time seeking a community based on generosity. She also didn't manage to create that herself. she chose to do something else, or she concluded that she must do something else. And we are trying to create such a community, as many people have done through the ages. She, as many of you know, because we talked about her for a year, prescribed to us the way of peace. She said she would remain a pilgrim until we have learned the way of peace, and the way of peace is this. And remember what the next 3 lines are? What is the way of peace according to Peace Pilgrim?
Overcome hatred with love.
Overcome hatred with love. And
sacrifice yourself totally to God.
not correct, no. It started with overcome evil with good. Did you say sacrifice? No, sorry.
Overcome hatred with love.
Overcome hatred with love and
Overcome.
yes. Evil with good and falsehood with truth. Good job. Very good. You got it.
Good job.
So it's very interesting because that is virtually an exact quote from a Buddhist text called the Dhammapada. And that text contains all 3 of those statements. Overcome hatred with love. And what's the next one in the Dhammapada?
Good with you.
Yes, I think the next is evil with good. It is, yes, that's correct. And evil with good. And then there's another line, and then falsehood with truth. But the line in the third line of those 4 is miserliness, stinginess with giving. So there are four aspects of the way of peace in the Buddhist tradition. I would very much surprise me if she got her basic message from the Dhammapada. But it's fascinating, isn't it, that it's so close. And it's also interesting that given her emphasis on sacrifice, on giving yourself, on sharing, generosity, that she didn't include that 4th aspect. But that aspect is taken very seriously in the Buddhist tradition. And when people come to us asking for things, or when we have the opportunity to give to them, it is often recommended that we, especially in the Mahayana school, that we look at them with gratitude. We're so happy that they're willing to take from us, because that will allow us to fulfill our path. There's the extreme example of this is in the Mahayana school, in which if someone comes to you and asks you for something, and if you give it to them, it will kill you. If you give the thing to them, then you will die. Then you should feel the most grateful for how nice they are, because they're coming, asking you for the ultimate sacrifice. And it's so kind of them to be willing to help you on your path. So the practice of giving is taken very seriously. And the emphasis is on the fact that if you give something away, if you give it away, then it becomes a spiritual treasure for you. If you merely lose it, you can come in, please. Come in. If you merely lose it, which you definitely will, at some point you'll merely lose everything you have, then you'll just lose it. And in all likelihood, that will be merely suffering for you and won't become a spiritual treasure. It won't become a source of pleasure. So, for most of us, we have things and then we lose them. And when we lose them, it's a source of suffering. But if we have things and then we give them away, then that's equally losing them. We have lost them in that case as well. But in that case, losing them has become deeply pleasurable. It's become a source of happiness, well-being, a spiritual treasure. So this is taken to be a very practical method of overcoming suffering. But it's based on a fundamentally different way of looking at ownership, at possession. And that is that in that tradition, accumulation of anything at all, accumulation of wealth, of course, of possessions, also of views, even accumulation of a physical form, any sort of accumulation, any sort of gathering up based on clinging and attachment, is suffering. That is suffering. That's what suffering is. That's equivalent to suffering. Any kind of accumulation based on clinging, based on attachment, any sense, I own this, this is mine, is suffering. It's a very different attitude from how we normally look at things in our modern world, in which the accumulation of things is taken to be the escape from suffering. And the shift from one way of looking at things to the other is, in many, many traditions, so many that it's startling, that basic shift from accumulation of mine, accumulation of things that are mine, is the escape from suffering, to accumulation of things that are mine is suffering, is the source of suffering. The shift from the latter to the former, from the artificial to the original, is the turning from living in the way of worldly injustice to spiritual harmony. So it's very important that we can make that transition, that each of us is an expert in making that transition, in knowing exactly how to shift from accumulation of my things is wonderful to accumulation of my things is terrifying. That's what we should be afraid of. Accumulating my things is something to be worried about. We should be very anxious. Oh no, who knows, today I might acquire something. But that is suffering. So we're afraid of it every morning. We review the day at night, hoping that we didn't get anything of our own today. And if we did, then we can do what... So I'll go to a very different spiritual tradition, but another tradition that very much emphasizes giving is the Islamic tradition. And there are stories about this with the Prophet Muhammad. When gifts were given, when say gold was given, he was very concerned that he might fail. He might be very busy and might fail to distribute that as alms that very day. He's known for this, for his concern about not being immediately generous. He might not get rid of it, give it, and therefore turn it into impeccable, exalted, ethical behavior that carries its reward beyond death. It would merely be some piece of gold that would weigh his life down, that would be the cause of a lack of spiritual perfection. One of my favorite examples of this, because it's one that I hope we can all relate to, is Native American Lakota spiritual teacher named Fool's Crow. Maybe you're familiar with Fool's Crow a little bit. Yeah, Fool's Crow was an amazing spiritual teacher. And he was known because he would do ceremonies and sometimes would receive gifts. He, like many of the natives who continued to live on the reservations, was quite poor and poverty. The livelihood of his ancestors had been taken away. It wasn't possible to flourish in the way that they had for so long. And so food was often sparse, sometimes entirely unavailable, but sometimes after he'd do a certain ceremony, it might be very plentiful. He'd have an abundance himself. In fact, perhaps enough to get through the winter. And yet he was known, after receiving these gifts, to have a great feast, to call everyone to his, I don't know what sort of abode he had, but maybe a trailer or something, wherever he happened to live in. They certainly weren't living in teepees at this point. But wherever he lived, he would call the community, and it would all get eaten in one day, be gone. And yet he had complete faith that more would come. He was filled with faith. And that faith allowed him to give in that way and to become a powerful, inspiring leader. The tradition that we currently follow most powerfully, most consistently, most popularly, the most popular spiritual tradition in our community also takes giving to be very important. And that religion is capitalism, is the economic structures surrounding liberal humanism. In capitalism, it's very important that you give your money away. Did you know that? It's very important, actually. It's the most important thing in capitalism. It's the fundamental quality of the modern economy, that you should give your money away. You should not keep it. You should be worried about keeping it for even one day. Correct? You should be sure that you don't have it. If you maybe you keep a little bit in your bank account, but you want as little in your bank account as possible, because it should be where?
Corporations.
Yes, it should be in the stock market. That's exactly right. So you should give it away. Absolutely give it away. Do everything you can to give your stuff away. Now, it's important for us to understand, because we grow up in this culture, and so we think that that's normal, but it really isn't normal. This is a very recent invention, and it was an incredibly powerful shift in terms of the world economy. In the past, a lot of this was developed in the West, and in the past in the West, you'd have nobility who, yes, thank you very much. You can just turn that up, and we should turn that up from now on. In the past, the nobility, the wealthy, the aristocracy had a lot of money. Maybe you know that. But if you think about them having a lot of money, what do you think of? You think of them living in these huge houses, mansions, with extensive gardens, being flamboyant and absurd in their constant use of their money. They did not invest it. They absolutely did not invest their money. It wasn't known. That wasn't the sort of thing you would do. Nowadays, if you visit wealthy people, and I visited some of the wealthiest people in the world at their homes, of course they have pretty big homes. They have a number of cars. But it isn't absurd in the way it used to be. And the vast majority of the money they have is not put into servants and properties, etc., etc. It's put into
Corporations.
investments. That's right. They invest most of it. So we've come to a point in which giving our money away is arguably more important to our economy than it's ever been before. In any economy. And because of that, our economy is the strongest economy and largest, strongest economy in world history by far. No comparison with any other. But there is one other difference in terms of this giving away of your money. Yes? It isn't only that it's very important to us. There's a string attached, isn't there? And that string is?
Expecting a return.
You expect a return. Precisely. Now, the definition of giving, of generosity in many traditions, including those that I just mentioned, and certainly many of you remember, we talked about this in Peace Pilgrim's case at length, the definition of giving is not expecting anything in return. If you're expecting something in return, it's not giving. Love, the definition of love is giving without expecting anything in return, according to her and according to these other traditions. The whole point is that you don't expect anything in return. Now, if you look at it very closely, if you look at it in terms of, at least in the Buddhist tradition, which is what I'm most familiar with, you can expect things in return. And those things can be rebirth in heaven or even rewards in this life. Now that exists. It happens. You get it. You can give in such a way that you get something in return. But it isn't as powerful and it isn't as beneficial for yourself or the world as giving without expecting anything in return. Why? Because the fundamental shift to a truly spiritual life is when you start giving without expecting anything in return. Why? Because under those circumstances, the emphasis isn't on accumulation. Now for us, what capitalism is accumulation. Capitalism is the accumulation of wealth. That's the point of capitalism, accumulation of wealth. That's what capitalism. You're accruing capital. You're using money to make money, using resources to get more resources. So that expectation of getting something in return is very difficult to break. It's very difficult for us to break, and it's difficult for us to know how to break it skillfully, to know exactly how to do it. How is it actually done? And then there's a further question, which is, why would you do it? Why would that be a good idea? And the problem with these questions is that it's very difficult to answer them very difficult to explain the answer in such a way that someone who hasn't experienced them will experience them. So, I'll do my best. When Jesus of Nazareth, a very important person in the founding of the religion we call Christianity, talked about rewards, talked about what we can trust, believe in, depend on. He talked about spiritual rewards being something that we can count on, because thieves can't take them away, fire can't burn them up, and even death can't destroy them. When we accumulate, gather things that we consider to be our own, we deeply know that those things soon enough will be taken away from us. And if we're holding on to them, then we know that they'll be taken away from us unwillingly. And we won't want them taken away when they're taken away, because that's what being attached to something, owning something, holding on to something is. It means that if it gets taken away, it's suffering. But it will get taken away. I, as many of you know, was recently in a cabin and a tree fell on it. And it becomes clear in a visceral way that, again, is very difficult to explain in words, that that cabin that I depend upon will soon enough be taken away from me. I then came out of the cabin and my car didn't work. So it became clear, okay, the car also, which I depend on, will soon enough be taken away from me. And now I've had all this, if any of you have been calling me, sorry, my phone's been broken, so that's why I haven't responded. The phone is taken away, and the phone contains a lot of important stuff, not just glass and plastic and silicone. It contains information. We nowadays deeply identify with information. It's an information economy, people say quite a bit. And we believe in the significance of information. That information, for many people, it's as if information is reality. Information is what life is, the point of life. The acquisition of information, of knowledge, understanding. Well, I had a lot of information in there that seemed to be totally gone. That was hard. That was difficult. And then furthermore, as I was in that cabin, and the tree fell on it, became clear that there's one other thing that soon enough will be taken away, and that's my body. This little fragile form, soon enough, will falter. Why? Because it's the nature of everything that comes together to come apart. It's impossible that something can come together without coming apart. Because it's the nature of everything that comes together to come apart. Seeing that clearly, we can make use of the coming apart of things, the experience of things coming apart, falling apart, you might say, as a source of happiness. Because if that very experience is the experience of giving away, losing out of compassion, then the pleasure that comes from that not only exists in the moment, but exists into the future. And the reason for me, as far as I can tell right now, that it's been so striking to me that my body is already lost, it's already broken, that my phone is already lost, it's already broken, the car is already lost, already broken, the cabin's already lost, already broken. All of my relationships are already lost, already broken. Everything I believe is already lost, already broken. Everything that I identify with is already lost, it's already broken. It's not actually that someday those things will break and fall apart. It's that they have the nature of breaking and falling apart, which means that right now they're already broken. They're already lost. The reason I think that that's been so striking to me is that the experiences in the cabin, many of them, were not that. When we consider it, it's important that we go through the process of realizing that everything that we have, everything that we know, everything that we are, everything that we do, is already broken. Everything, the whole thing, is broken, is hopeless. There's nothing in it worth having, because all of it is broken, lost. It's important for us to go through that process, and we might not like going through that process. But if we go through that process, to the extent we go through that process, it's possible to awaken to a world, to an experience that is not broken, that is not lost, that cannot be lost, that cannot break. Because that which has not come together cannot come apart. That which has not accumulated cannot be lost. You can't lose what you never had. And if it becomes clear that we never had anything, that we never were anything, then the burden of the accumulated possessions, views, objects, body, mind, the burden of carrying that around and trying to hold together something that has the nature of falling apart, that burden is dropped. And we see clearly then, more clearly than we see this room right now, we see clearly that there is a world that's not broken, that's not fundamentally hopeless. And the value of that experience is impossible to understand, impossible to conceive of, impossible to put into terms of views, because views are simply accumulation. Impossible to conceive of in any metaphor, in any description. The importance of that experience is supreme. And for that reason, again, in terms of the Buddhist tradition, the Buddha said that the gift of the Dharma, the gift of this teaching, the gift of the path to letting go of all acquisitions, is the greatest gift of all. There's no gift that can compare to the gift of helping people to let go of all acquisitions. And our community is one that shares in many ways and can also share in this, can also help each other and everyone in the process of learning how to let go. This particular community, because we're interested in responsibility, our highest calling in terms of responsibility, in terms of having an impact on our society, is finding a way that giving without the expectation of a return can supplant, can become more powerful than our current religion of giving with the expectation of a return. How can that actually happen? That's our job to figure out, and we can figure it out as a community. Today, we'll have the chance to, quote, figure that out, to work that out within ourselves during the practice. We do that so that it's possible to give a gift that no one receives. Bring your attention to your breathing, and in particular, to begin, observe very clearly that every breath requires the giving, the letting go of your breath. If you don't exhale, you can't inhale. You must give it away. You must let go of it in order to have it, in order to experience it. With each cycle of breath, notice clearly the giving away, the losing, letting go, relinquishment aspect of the breath. In order to explore the relinquishment aspect of the breath, continue to relinquish the air in your lungs as you exhale, just a bit beyond what's comfortable for you. Continue to exhale into just a bit of discomfort. So you're a little bit uncomfortable. You don't have enough air. There might be some concern about letting go. Might bring up a deep visceral fear of needing to let go of this body because it may feel as if we're going to die. I'm not suggesting that you push it too far, but play with that discomfort a bit. Just continue to exhale until you're on the edge of the relinquishment that you feel comfortable with. Explore that boundary. Explore what it's like to be on that edge with each exhale. Again, the reward, the pleasure that can come from this simple exercise is inconceivable. It's not possible for us to understand it. The astonishing bliss that can come simply from this exercise. Please explore that. It's not that there isn't some discomfort. There may be some discomfort. And yet, the relinquishment that we're practicing resolves suffering in a way that is inconceivable. Simply exhale, 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 until you reach that magical moment when you're relinquishing a bit more air than you feel comfortable with. And explore that experience. It's very common, it's very normal as you do this exercise to find yourself slightly gasping for air on the inhale. Slightly gasping. And if you're truly exhaling beyond the point of comfort with each exhale, then on the inhale it's common to slightly gasp for air. If you're not experiencing that, then either you have deep equanimity or you're not doing the exercise. It's important that you do this exercise with each breath, every breath. And if you come to feel that slight gasping for air, then explore how to relax on the inhale. How is that possible? How can you continue to relax through the inhale? Relinquish, relinquish, relax, relax, drop, drop, lose, lose. The most precious thing to you, air. Lose that. And on the inhale, don't grab at it again. This exercise is very powerful. It's an advanced meditation technique. It leads us to the direct experience of seeing that losing, letting go, is the basis of happiness, not getting and holding on. Now we may think as we do it, well, okay, where is this happiness that Soryu talks about? I want the bliss. Doesn't seem to have come yet. I'm ready for it. Come on, give me some happiness by now. That desire to acquire happiness is exactly what we're letting go of in this exercise. The sense, I want to get some bliss out of this, is exactly what we're dropping. How to drop it? Keep on exhaling until you drop it. That's all. Very simple. In a moment, I'll ring the bell and we'll have a period of practice in motion. And that means that if you wish, you can stand up and stretch, walk around, get some water, whatever you'd like, for just a few minutes, about 3 minutes. And then come back, return to our seats, and continue with the practice. In terms of this technique, it's most important that we continue the technique through those activities. Why? Because if we do that, then we're letting go of those activities. We're not getting caught up in those activities. The direct experience of not getting caught up in those activities is the point of the breathing. Not just to breathe, but that we're breathing enables us, that we're experiencing breathing enables us to move through those activities without getting tangled up in them. So continue with this breathing as you move through those activities. And then when I ring the bell for a second time, return to your seat and we'll continue to explore this practice. Continue with the technique of exhaling just beyond what's comfortable, exploring relinquishment of what's most immediately precious to our bodies, that being air, our breath. Practice relinquishing, losing that precious food for our bodies. And then explore how is it that we can receive that food, that nourishment, without grasping onto it, without gasping for air. How can we be relaxed even while we receive what we want? Very difficult time to be relaxed. Very difficult time to not cling. Explore this bodily experience. Now, as you explore this process, also explore as you exhale, as you relinquish the breath, especially at the end of the exhale. Explore relinquishing opinions. You don't need to look for them. You don't have opinions at a certain moment, that's fine. But if they arise, observe that as we come nearer to the end of the breath, they tend to dissolve. That also may feel uncomfortable. And the discomfort associated with losing our views, our opinions, often feels much more concerning, much more valid than the discomfort around losing our breath. But intentionally explore that discomfort of losing our positions, our standpoints, our fixed views, our opinions. Because they are food for our minds in the same way that our breath is food for our bodies. And most of us are even more attached. Most of us cling even more firmly to our opinions than we do to our breath. To most of us, our opinions are more precious than even our breath. And we can observe that because we can hold our breath. We cannot breathe for a few minutes if we wish. But how many of us cannot think for a few minutes? How many of us can stay on one single thought for a few minutes? How many of us can stay on 100 thoughts in a few minutes? Our minds constantly seeking the next correct view. This is our chance to set aside that seeking, that clinging, that grasping after opinions, thoughts, conceptions, and instead experience the discomfort and then the pleasure of letting go of them. So as you exhale, and in particular as you come to the end of the exhale, watch how it is that it becomes natural to drop views, to forget our opinions. opinions, views, the most significant acquisition of the human being. We human beings tend to accumulate views and cling to them firmly, even to the death. We're practicing right now the relinquishment of those acquisitions. But in just the same way that when we practice relinquishing the air in our lungs, that allowed us to receive air in our lungs. As we relinquish opinions, our goal isn't to get rid of opinions, ideas, thoughts, conceptions, standpoints, views. It's not to get rid of them. It's to not cling to them. And therefore, as you relinquish your thoughts, your views, your opinions, if they come back, if they arise in your mind again, don't try to suppress them or get rid of them. Practice experiencing the arising of thoughts and opinions without clinging to them. Staying relaxed without grabbing on and concluding only this is true, everything else is wrong. Without structuring an identity around that view. That's the practice. Not getting rid of opinions and views, but relinquishing them. So at this time, as we exhale, we're practicing relinquishing the air in our bodies and the views in our minds. As we inhale, we're practicing allowing ourselves to receive air into our bodies without clinging to it. And if it happens to come, if it happens to naturally arise, we allow the experience of opinions and views without clinging to them. And as we near the end of this meditation session, in your mind, cultivate, explore, feed one particular view. Cultivate this in your mind. Arouse it. Care for it. Allow it to flourish and become the basis of your identity. That view is, there is giving. There is giving says two things. One, there is such a thing as giving. It's real. It's possible to give. It's possible to be generous. And two, it is beneficial. Generosity is beneficial. There is giving. It's real and beneficial. And as you cultivate this view in your mind, cultivate the pleasant feelings associated with it in your body. There is giving. It's real and beneficial. Know that in your mind. Feel that in your body. time for questions and discussion. Feel free to make use of it however you wish. Mm-hmm.
In the first part of the talk, before we did meditation, when you said that everything is broken, I felt a lot of comfort in that because so much of the time, so much of my energy is going to maintaining that harmony in relationships and my own like internal world and stories I tell. And so just like thinking about it as everything being broken, it gave me comfort in just like experiencing that disharmony and being able to accept that. And then trying to be as truthful and generous as possible, like in that broken world.
Good. Yes. The comfort that may come from acknowledging that this world that has come together inherently comes apart is often the result of being motivated to bring forth harmony out of a denial of the nature of things. I think if things are falling apart, then that's due to something being wrong, versus if things are falling apart, that's because that's how it is. Because of that, we can settle into it and see a very different motivation for bringing forth harmony. And that's compassion. There's absolutely reason to act, to do good. In fact, if you consider these thoughts and views, the simplest way to consider a thought, a view that is being given away, that is generous, is that you have a thought of compassion. That thought, as you have it, is being given away. It's not a thought that you're possessing, it's a thought that is happening for the benefit of the world. So you can think in a way that is generous, that isn't about clinging. Not that thinking is bad. On the contrary, thinking can be a very powerful source of compassion and compassionate action. If, however, that, quote, compassion is based on clinging, based on forcing the world to be the way I think it should be, forcing it to be a certain way, trying to get it to remain that way, that clinging will definitely cause suffering. It's possible to have a compassionate thought and act on it. That's entirely possible. But that compassionate thought doesn't deny the significance, the substance, the nature of things. If we're trying to maintain harmony, that is itself a lack of harmony. Because we're not in harmony with the nature of things, that being that things fall apart. Yes?
Yeah.
When we see that, then we can, out of compassion, act in ways that are in harmony. It's very mysterious. We can bring forth peace. Peace Pilgrim wasn't sending us on a fool's errand. It's possible to bring forth a world of peace, bring forth an entirely pleasant world. That's possible. And the people who are able to bring that world forth are people who don't have attachment to it, who don't fight for it. But it can sure look like people are fighting for it who aren't fighting for it. If that makes sense. Because they're not even attached to not fighting. They just don't fight. Because it's useless to do so. but it can look like it. It's very, very subtle and confusing. Yeah,
I have a two-part sharing. One is
yeah, please.
teaching and one is a question.
Yeah,
So just at the beginning when you were talking about different traditions.
yeah, please.
I don't know if this is helpful for people, but in the Jewish tradition, my ancestral tradition, we're commanded to give at least 10% of our earnings
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And if you're like hobbled with grad school loans or whatever it is, and you can't give money, then you give time.
Mm-hmm.
And the highest form of giving that tradition is anonymous, and it has like a higher energetic power
Mhm.
of healing, and then it descends in effect when the name's attached or there's the clinging.
Mm-hmm.
It moves it. And the question I have is kind of like subtle discernment about sometimes if you're giving with time, oftentimes in projects it ends up taking a lot more than you think to do something well or thoroughly, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ends up taking like a lot more time and energy. And I'm just curious, navigating the energetics of potential resentment that might arise, because maybe a lot of a certain amount of time or space to give something, and then actually to do it well requires like a lot more time, like I think of sacrifice maybe. And then that cuts into maybe other things that might be you see that were nurturing or good, but you can't do as much because you're trying to. I'm just curious about that resentment energy I've noticed arise sometimes, and not knowing if it's just like a lower self that needs like honing and just watch it, or if it's actually like a signal of healthy boundaries.
Yeah. Can I ask you some questions about your question?
Sure.
When you talk about resentment,
Yeah.
who or what are you resenting?
Well, when it comes up,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
resenting what's resenting that all of a sudden there's a requirement of like a lot more time and energy than was originally thought was needed.
And who or what is requiring that of you?
Like the energetics of whatever project it is. So whether it's like
Mm-hmm.
a thorough correspondence with all the people involved or research to do it well or whatever it is.
So then the situation is requiring it of you. There isn't someone who's telling you have to give more time.
Right, but to not give it would like be negligent or sloppy.
Uh-huh. Right. So it's simply the way it is
Yeah,
that requires the time.
yeah,
Because to do the project correctly, well, completely, as you say, requires more time than was understood previously. And so we feel resentment toward that situation, toward the world as a whole.
yeah.
The world is requiring more of me than I have. Is that correct? Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, and maybe not than I have, but then like maybe I was giving to like other things that brought like wholesome joy and goodness in other places.
And then, but the world is requiring that also.
Yeah.
But the world is requiring more giving. You have, let's just say for the easy math,
Okay.
useful to keep math easy.
Okay.
There are 2 projects only, 2 things in your whole life.
Great.
I know there are more than 2, but let's just keep it the lowest plural number. So, yes, that's the lowest plural integer. So you have two projects, and the world is requiring a certain amount of time and energy for this one, which is say 60% of your time and energy, just to keep this easy.
Great.
And this one is also requiring a certain amount of time and energy. Let's say it's 60%. And now we resent that the world is requiring 120% of 100% of my time. Yes, that is very painful. It's something that's painful for a lot of us. There's just very little time and energy to do everything that has to be done. But I'd say, first of all, it sounds like you're not doing what many of us do. And that is, rather than blame the way things are, we often blame the other people involved. That's something that's very common. That's why I asked the question.
Right.
So a lot of the time, the situation will require more time.
Right.
So we blame the person who's pointing that out to us.
Right. No, and the blame isn't going to them, but I notice the resentment because
Mhm.
my correspondence with people might be shorter,
Uh-huh.
less compassionate
Yep.
than it normally would be.
Great.
Less spacious and kind, and that's the
Mhm.
signal.
Sure.
That resentment is, yeah.
But even so, even at that moment,
Okay.
you're not resenting the person,
No.
even if your communication is terse.
Yeah.
So that's very exciting. That's the first. I'd like to just start there because I know it's very common in the world that we get annoyed at the person who's pointing out the fact that this is going to take more than we thought, even though they didn't. It's not their fault. They're just pointing it out. So that's wonderful. It's very good in itself. So then we're annoyed at the world for requiring more time and energy than is available. And that can be very significant. I think one thing that we can now talk about is what to do about that. How do we look at this? What's the appropriate way of looking at this?
Yeah, and how to relate to it.
And how to relate to it.
It's like, feel
Yeah.
this, and I don't want to feel this.
Yeah, right, exactly. In my experience, what's most helpful is to experience that itself very clearly and to more and more deeply face the very fact that you're bringing up, that our time and energy is extremely limited. To deeply face that. Often that's the last thing we'd like to do, but to face that is appropriate humility. To resent the fact that we have limitations is, in a subtle way, conceit, arrogance. We do have limitations, and they're extraordinary. We have extreme limitations. Very little time, very little energy, very little control, very little power. So all of that has to be used carefully. And in acknowledging that, those things can be seen as increasingly precious resources. So it's good to have that humility. We don't want to do that. We don't want to have those limitations. We want it all. That's what we want. We want it all. We want to live forever and make everything, we have total power, make everything be the way I want it to be. We want to be right about everything, and we want to both accrue worldly power and achieve spiritual awakening. We want it all. We want the whole package. Each of us wants all of that. And so the first thing is to deeply acknowledge that we have limited time. And then in my experience, the second thing is to acknowledge that if things are going to take that much time, then I will give it that much time. No matter what. I will just give it that much time. The thing is that if you're going to look at it that way, if you're going to, which I'm not telling you need to. You don't need to look at it this way. I'm just talking about my experience, which shouldn't be your experience, so you have to find your own experience, and I'm not trying to proselytize here. But if you're going to look at it in that way, then you can't believe. If you're going to look at it in that way. Now, if you're not going to look at it in that way, you can believe what you want. But if you're going to look at it in that way, you cannot believe that your efforts will end at death. Because then you can increase 100%. And if you commit to that, if you're going to look at it in that way, and you commit to that, then that is a different approach to this problem. Then you simply commit that no matter what happens, I utterly commit, I dedicate everything to this for as long as it takes. The extreme version of this is, however long it takes, I will resolve all suffering throughout the entire universe. I personally will resolve every problem that everyone has for all time. And you and I both know, as many of us here in this room know, how hard it is to resolve even the slightest suffering of one person. Not even complete resolution of all suffering for one person is easy. Even that's extremely difficult. And so we face that with vigor, excitement. This is possible for me. I'm going to spend trillions of years utterly committed to whatever this dedication, whatever the project is that you're talking about. However long it takes, fine. That's how long it takes. It's a different approach, and I'm not saying that you need to see things that way, but if you see things in that way and that makes sense to you, then it does change the equation. Does that make any sense? So those are two different ways of looking at the same thing. And I think it's very important, the first one, I just want to emphasize the importance of deeply facing the fact that our time and energy is limited. It's extremely important to do that. And I'd say that until we've done that, the second approach may not be yet appropriate. We have to see that with uncompromising humility. There's very little time and energy. So every moment matters. And if we see that every moment matters, then we know that everything we do matters. And the moment we see that everything we do matters, the path to full awakening is guaranteed. And quick. It won't take more than a week.
The only word I can say
True.
that when you say all that, like the word servant,
Yeah.
like
Right.
first it was slave,
Right,
that's where the word
exactly.
but then servant, something between those two words.
Wonderful, yeah. That's great. Yes,
Thank you.
yes. Very good. Yeah?
Yes, I was just going to add that for projects that don't take 3 trillion years,
Mm-hmm.
I find that as soon as I acknowledge that it will take as long as it takes, it becomes a really joyful experience.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, I really enjoy it.
But it's tricky because sometimes we can acknowledge that and we're wrong. Sometimes we acknowledge that it will take 10 years and it turns out it's going to take 100, or we acknowledge it's going to take 10 minutes and it turns out it'll take 4 hours, but we don't have 4 hours. So under those circumstances, what do? You acknowledge it's going to take however long it takes, and then you don't have time to finish it. You die first. How do you handle that?
It's out of my control.
What did you say?
It's out of my control.
Oh, I see. So your basic, okay, very good. So then your basic strategy is actually to let go of control.
Yeah.
I see. Your basic strategy is to set aside the wielding of power over what is needed, and to let whatever is needed be what is needed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. So then setting aside control over results is your basic strategy, and then it becomes joyful.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Very good. Excellent. I saw Andrea's hand first, so there we are.
I just very briefly, setting aside control is great, but also setting aside striving is something that I keep letting go of, letting them strive, and that helps me to proceed joyously through a project.
And what is unjoyful about striving?
It's grasping. It's
Huh?
it has an expectation to it, and it's a motivation that feels pushed by inadequacy.
Oh, very good. So there's a lot that you're fitting into the word strive.
You're right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me repeat to be sure I understand the many components of the word strive. One aspect is that it's pushing. Another aspect is that it's clinging.
Right.
So there's push and pull in this word.
Mm-hmm.
Another is that what you're clinging and pushing, what you're pushing and pulling, grasping, is some consequence that you're expecting. I think when you said expectations, you're talking about consequences, results.
You're right.
So then you have a certain relationship with results, correct?
Uh-huh.
Which I think may connect to your point. And then also, much of that, or perhaps all of that, is the result of a deep feeling of inadequacy of yourself.
Right.
Great. Very good. So then that's a very different approach from what I was saying, which is totally face your inadequacy.
Yeah.
Although, interesting enough, they may end up in the same place, because if you totally face your inadequacy, and if you let go of your inadequacy, either way, you have equanimity with things as they are.
Right.
Whatever you are, you've dealt with that. Great. So then, setting aside striving means setting aside push and pull regarding results and the motivations based on a sense of self-inadequacy. Correct? And to set all of that aside helps.
Right.
I think it does. I think if you can do that, that helps a lot. Yeah.
It does. Sometimes when you're not striving and you're just aligning, there is a lot of inertia.
That's right.
And sometimes there is sort of like, gotta get something going, or to keep it going, it needs nurturing, so it's like a fine line. It'd be interesting to explore the discernment of like what's striving and what's working with the greater flow.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's tricky. That's why I wanted to really carefully define the word. So for a lot of people, striving, I don't think, means many of those components. Yeah. So for me, I didn't know that you included a lot of that in the word striving. But it's useful to define things carefully, because as you say, a lot of the time you can be working very, very hard without doing the things that are referred to in this definition of the word striving.
Right.
It's possible to work very hard. In fact, I'd suggest you can work harder if you don't maintain those components.
Yes.
But then but then a person's working very hard, and people might think, well, they're striving. So Andrea thinks they're doing the wrong thing. But I don't think Andrea does think that they're necessarily doing the wrong thing.
It's not the hard work that bothers me. It's the layer of the filter over it, those other shadows.
Yep. Great. Very good. That's a very useful discussion. I think we have a few more, but Jet.
I think she was
Yeah. So Jesse, we have a number of people, but go ahead.
Okay. Just to add to that discussion, it seems that, and a segue into what I was going to share is that in collecting things, I notice that a lot of them have to do with projects that are incomplete, and that there is an attachment to things with the idea of completion, and that it's really important to persevere and to complete. At some point in life, you recognize that there is no time to complete, and you recognize the value of totally abandoning a project that has taken a lifetime or has taken a love of investment, an investment of a great deal that seems to be connected to some essential part of you. So letting go of that is significant, and I find that more interesting than some of the other things too. Because in that idea of not having to give without expectations, I find having an expectation of the essence that arises helps me, actually, to expect that I actually will get closer to my essential self is a good thing, I think. And the thing that I wanted to share, as briefly as I can, is that during the hurricane in Florida, I lost a save from these two posts over to the wall, up to the ceiling, and down to the floor. There was a surge that totally eliminated that much possession. And it was simply given to me the information, all is gone. That's it. It's like, and somebody laughingly, smilingly, friendly said to me, "You wanted to let go of your things." And I said, "Easy for you to say." And what I wanted to share was that during this memory of that came up in this meditation, and it seemed, and there was probably a number of things in that collection that had to do with projects that needed to be let go of. And that at first, I not only was I struck with the impact of the hurricane, bodily, emotionally, spiritually. It's just like I was in shock because of the people there, because of my home there, because of, it's just like, okay, something, and I had to be present with it. And I'm wanting to bring to the discussion the value of being present with the process of letting go. Because whether it's an idea, an opinion, a thing, a project, any of those things, that there's something, when your body goes into shock, that's a natural good thing. It knows, it has a wisdom that it knows that you have to go through a process. And so when I was present with it for a period of time, afterwards, it was okay. And I could even recognize and remember things within that collection, plus the land that I would go to that I can't go to, and the destination that no longer is there. It's like, okay, now where do I go? It's, and my friend's home just, totally collapsed, and it's just so much going on. It's just like, but it's just like letting go. When I remember now, it's really easy. And I think it's easy now because I was present with it then.
Magnificent. I appreciate that. Is 1 minute sufficient?
Maybe.
Okay.
I'll ask my question, and if you don't think it'll take a minute.
I can answer in a very short period of time.
can we just go, maybe this isn't worthwhile, but can we go over definitions of sacrifice and suffering? Because, well, I was raised Catholic, and growing up, I often thought of those two things as synonymous. And,
Right.
And
Yeah, right.
since coming here,
Very good.
there are many examples where you sacrifice something
Mhm.
and it actually reduces suffering.
Mhm.
And then I hear stories like Jesse's, and I think, well, if I involuntarily sacrificed all of these possessions
Mhm.
all at once, it's sort of traumatic. Maybe that's
Mhm.
something I would think of as suffering.
Mhm.
So, clarify, please.
Suffering is a problem. Are we done with that one?
Suffering is a problem, okay.
And sacrifice is letting go of something that you consider to be your own for the benefit of the world. Good?
Good enough. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Of course, as you say, the words are used in different ways in different contexts. So that's what I mean. Good. Wonderful.